Bio students. So today we start topic 9, and we're going to start with topic 9.1, which is xylem transport. So we're going to learn the function of xylem, which is a tissue in plants, and we're going to see what happens as a result of this xylem working. So we're going to start by looking at transpiration and evaporation, some of the similarities and some of the differences. So let's get started. Here is the understanding that goes along with the term transpiration. So transpiration is the inevitable consequence of gas exchange in the leaf. So we know that in the leaf of a plant, right, we have on the underside these tiny little stomata or pores. And when those pores open to release the oxygen and to take in the carbon dioxide, right, inevitably water is going to get lost. So it's an inevitable consequence. We know that plants transport water from the roots to the leaves to replace the loss from transpiration. So then this plant who has roots, right, has to continue the uptake of water from the roots to make up the difference with all the water that it lost when it opened the stomata. All right, so when we think of transpiration, we think of water loss, not just from the leaves, but also water loss from the stems. Although that doesn't happen as much as the water that gets lost from the leaves from the stomata. So how does this happen? So we know that light energy converts water in the leaves. So when this hits the water in the leaves, it converts it to vapor. And we know that that's evaporation, right? When liquid water converts into vapor. And then we know that that is going to evaporate from the leaf via the stomata, right? So this is going to be water vapor, water gas. And then new water is absorbed from the soil by the roots, creating a difference in pressure between the leaves, who now have a low pressure, and the roots, who have a high pressure. So that's something important to remember along the way. Let's see how far I can move this up. Now, water is going to flow via the xylem along the pressure gradient to replace the water loss. So again, there's going to be a high pressure here in the roots. There's going to be low pressure here in the leaves. So now the water through the xylem is going to be moving from the roots down here through the stems to the leaves. Okay. So once again, the stomata, which are on the underside of the leaves, they're going to open to facilitate the gas exchange for photosynthesis. So we know that transpiration is going to be affected by the levels of photosynthesis. So obviously a plant that's undergoing high levels of photosynthesis is going to have high transpiration rates, right? Because that means that the stomata is opening a lot, and that plant is going to suffer from that water loss. So again, something to keep in mind. Okay, so now let's move to evaporation. And let's look at this. So we know that the adhesive property of water, and this is something that you learned back in 9th grade, right? Water likes to stick to other surfaces. So the adhesive property of water and evaporation generates tension forces in the leaf cell walls. So we're going to explore how that happened. So water is lost from the leaves of the plant when it is converted into vapor, and that's what we call evaporation. So evaporation is the conversion of water from liquid to gas, and transpiration is the loss of that water through the leaves, mostly through the leaves, right, as the water diffuses through the stomata. So let's move here so we can see the picture. So we know that some of the light energy absorbed by the leaves is converted to heat. So here we have a picture of a leaf tissue. So think of it this way. If this was a leaf, right? And if I could peel a layer of this leaf and look at what's inside the leaf, this is what I would find. So right here is the top of the leaf, and right here is the underside of the leaf. So remember that on the underside, under here is where we're going to find the stomata, or the openings. So when light hits that leaf, right, that light energy is going to be absorbed, and some of it is going to be converted into heat. Now, that means that the water that's found within this leaf tissue is going to be converted to gas, right? And it's going to evaporate. And when the stomata right here, when the stomata open, some of that water is going to evaporate, right? It's going to be converted into vapor or gas. So when that happens, we said, and let me draw a plant here again. Okay, so here's the leaves. No flowers, just a leaf. So here's the root, and here's the leaf. We said that when that water leaves, that creates low pressure up here, and there's high pressure in the roots because it's absorbing the water. So when we see the vapor diffusing out of the stomata, that's going to create a negative pressure gradient within the leaf. And this is what it means, right? That there's going to be low pressure on that leaf, high pressure in the root. So this negative pressure gradient is going to create a tension force in the leaf cell walls. So now in here, there's going to be tension within the leaf cell walls, and that is going to draw the water up from the high pressure in the roots to the low pressure in the leaf. And when that tension force draws the water up, and the water is going to be transported through xylem, which is the tissue that transports water in the plant. That pool of water moving from the roots to the leaf, that pool is called transpiration pool. That means that the water is being pulled from the xylem under tension due to the adhesive forces, or to the adhesive attraction between water and the leaf cell walls. Okay? So here we see in the leaf tissue that you have these vascular bundles within the plant and within the stem. And these vascular bundles, they're kind of like a transport system of like arteries and veins. And they travel throughout the whole stem of the plant and the leaf of the plant. So when you see those tiny little veins in a leaf, you are looking at a vascular bundle. And that vascular bundle is made up of xylem tissue and phloem tissue. And xylem is what transports that water from the roots to the rest of the plant. And phloem is what transports the nutrients of the plants, like glucose. And it transports a little bit of water too, because that glucose needs to be dissolved in the water. But xylem, as you see here in blue, it's mostly water. So that water is going to reach all of these different cells within this leaf tissue. So what type of cells are found within the leaf tissue? Well, plant cells, right? Now there's two different types of plant cells. So when you were back in 9th grade, you always drew a plant cell like a square, right? And you have the cell wall and you have the cell membrane. And that's true, right? Somewhat, that plants have a cell wall here, but notice that these plant cells can vary in shape, right? Some can be spongy and some can be palisade or columnar shape. So here we see two types of plant cells. We see palisade mesophyll cells and we see spongy mesophyll cells. So these are two types of plant cells found within the leaf tissue. And notice that these plant cells contain the chloroplasts. So that's where photosynthesis is going to happen within the leaf. Okay? All right, so moving right along, let's look at how this plant is going to regulate water loss. So regulating of water loss. So we know that in the underside of the leaf, we have the stomata, right? And the stomata needs to be able, on the underside here, we have the stomata, the pores, or the stoma. And we know that there has to be some sort of regulation of the stomata, right? Because they can't just remain open all the time, because then the plant is going to lose all of its water. So the amount of water loss from the leaves, or the transpiration rate, right? Transpiration is how much water is leaving the plant, is regulated by the opening and the closing of the stomata. So how does that happen? So if you look at this picture here, we see that the actual opening is the stomata. And the stomata is surrounded by these cells here called guard cells. So notice how the opening and the closing of that pore is surrounded by these guard cells. So what do guard cells do? Guard cells flank the stomata and can occlude the opening by becoming increasingly flaccid in response to cellular signals. So here you see the stomata open, and you see that the guard cells are very turgid, right? So if they are very turgid, let me go back here. Notice that there's lots of water inside the vacuoles, but there's also chemical signals that are allowing these guard cells to remain open and turgid. But notice that the guard cells can also become flaccid. So that means that they're losing some form of turgor pressure. And that means that they close. And that means that the opening closes, or the stomata close. Okay, so let's see what triggers that. So when a plant becomes dehydrated, or it starts to wilt from water stress, then the mesophyll cells of the guard cells, so this is a guard cell, so these guard cells are regulated by mesophyll cells. So what do these mesophyll cells do? They release a plant hormone called abscisic acid, or ABA. And abscisic acid is considered a hormone in plant, and is going to trigger an efflux of potassium from the guard cells. And that's going to decrease the water pressure within the cell, or they lose turgor. So here, when they close, that means that there's an efflux of potassium leaving the guard cells. So they lose turgor, or they lose pressure, and they close. And that efflux, or release of potassium, is triggered by abscisic acid, which is a hormone. Write that down. And this hormone is released by the mesophyll cells. Okay. Again, there's two types of mesophyll cells, right? We have the palisade and the spongy mesophyll cells. So if we look back here at our diagram, here we see the palisade mesophyll, the spongy mesophyll, and here we see the stomata right here, or the opening, and we know that that's going to be regulated by the guard cells here. Okay, and here they don't really show the guard cells the same way as they do in that diagram down here. Okay, but they're still there, right? These are supposed to be guard cells right here, right? But again, they don't look nowhere near the same way that they do down here. So then that's how the stomata is going to open and close. So look at the transpiration rate here. So if it's open, the transpiration rate is going to be high. If it's closed, the transpiration rate is going to be low. So the stomata pores, the opening and the closing, is responsible for the levels of transpiration, right? But what's going to allow this stomata to open and close? Well, also other factors will affect the transpiration rates. Humidity, for example. If it's humid outside, that means that the plant is not risking much by opening, right? So if it's humid outside, the stomata can remain open and there could be high rates of photosynthesis. But if the temperature is too high, let's say, or the light intensity is also too high, then that means that this plant can lose a lot of water. So during high temperatures, because of light intensity, the stomata might want to remain closed to prevent dehydrating. Same thing if there's a lot of wind. That's going to increase the rate of transpiration. A lot of water is going to be evaporated. So all of these are factors that also affect the transpiration rate. You saw some of these back in HL1. Okay, so that's it for the first section of 9.1.